and then pass down the top. I do not know why the good Lord devised the system like this. He did not ask me for my opinion. But it certainly can produce problems unless we are careful with management. Because the food has to cross the air. And so when we are feeding the calves, we must make sure that they are able to breathe easily at the same time. Next acetate, please. For example, if the calf has to put its head a long way down into a bucket, so if it has to, if the calf has to put its head a long way down into the bucket, then not only is it difficult for it to drink because it has to come, the liquid has to come up a long way, but also it is very difficult for it to breathe. Perhaps we can ask the chairman to try. Later I am going to go fishing. You see, just in case, I have also brought my fishing net. This would be very difficult. And I have even seen systems at home where the calf is having to kneel down to reach the bucket. So maybe I will not stand on the table. I have been told not to stand on the table. But they did not tell me I could not kneel on the table. But I have seen systems in England where the bucket is so low that the calf has to kneel down to get its head in the bucket. I certainly would not be able to drink milk from that bucket. It's only a simple point, but it's very important in terms of digestion. You may think that on your farm you have a serious infection present, but perhaps the only problem is a bucket deficiency. Next acetate, please. Another extremely important part of the digestive anatomy of the calf is the esophageal groove. When the calf is young, the milk has to flow into the fourth stomach, into the abomasum. But at the same time, some food must go into the first stomach, into the rumen. And it is, we could imagine a system, for example, where our lunch is in that room there. I can already imagine my lunch because I like eating. Let us imagine our lunch is in this room, or maybe it is the lunch for the interpreters, and we want to give them, they need to have their lunch in there. Now you would think, if you were going to devise such a system, that you would have a nice channel running along the floor from the lunchroom into the interpreter's booth. But for some reason, when the system was planned, the channel was put across the roof. Again, I don't know why he did it. Perhaps he likes a challenge. But this is the system we have. So somehow we have to get milk from here in an open channel across to the two lovely girls in there. Now, the best way would be for me to go over to take it to them, and I would like to do that. But that is why they are enclosed in a glass box, so I cannot get in. The channel across the ceiling is known as the esophageal groove. And when the calf feeds, it is important that that groove closes. It is vitally important that that groove closes. Because if I am trying to transfer milk from the dining room to the girls in the box, and I spill some milk on the floor of this room, maybe a litre or two of milk, within maybe 12 hours, that milk will go very sour and will produce problems in this room. So when we are feeding calves, we need to make sure that the groove closes. The groove, the milk flows down the esophagus and then has to go across the top of the rumen through the omasum and into the abomasum. Here is a diagram of the groove in the wall of the rumen when it is open. And here is the groove when it is closed. And it is vitally important that that groove closes. Slides, please. This is the rumen of an adult animal, so it is slightly different from the rumen of a calf. But here is the esophagus running down into the rumen, and then in some way we have to transfer milk across the top of here and out to there. The anatomy of the groove is like this. Here again is the esophagus coming down. Here is the open groove running along to here. And we must not allow milk to fall into the rumen. The end of the groove, here is the esophagus, here. The groove runs into the omasum and then into the abomasum. So milk must flow the whole of this direction through here. To achieve closure of this groove, these pillars shorten and one pillar folds over the top of the other. That is simply the anatomy. What is much more important to us, of course, is how the management factors which produce this closure. Right, next acetate, please. So the esophageal groove allows milk to pass directly from the esophagus into the abomasum. Closure of the groove consists of contraction of the pillars that we saw on the slide, so the lips of the groove touch, a shortening of the canal, and then the lips fold one over the top of the other. Next acetate, please. Now, if the groove fails to close, what happens? Well, we know that milk falls into the rumen. And this will produce things like diarrhea, bloat, colic, and perhaps more importantly, it simply produces poor development of the rumen. Because if we spill milk onto the floor of this hall, it goes sour and it damages the floor. And in the same way, if we spill milk into the rumen of the calf, it goes sour, it damages the wall of the rumen, and it leads to very poor growth of the calf, simply because the calf is not able to absorb nutrients from the rumen. Next, please. Next acetate, those. Thanks. So, what stimuli are there to close the groove? There isn't a single way, there isn't a single stimulus. What we must do is to show the calf that drinking milk is a pleasurable sensation. There are other things in life where you need to just have a little bit of background first. Maybe you need some soft music to start with. Maybe you need the right sort of environment. Maybe you need to go along wearing some nice aftershave. Because although you will get there in the end, if there is a slow build-up, then I suspect it will be more successful. I can hear that a few people understand what I am talking about. And feeding of calves is the same. It's no good coming along and just putting the bucket in front of them and say, do it. Because you will get better closure of the esophageal groove if the calf knows that it is going to be fed. If it sees someone coming, just the sight of someone carrying the milk is a good thing. It can hear maybe the milk being mixed, or even the person coming along carrying the buckets of milk. Maybe it can smell. Certainly the flavor of milk, the taste is important. And even things like the temperature. For older calves particularly, I don't think it's too important whether you feed the milk hot or cold. But what is important is that when you have decided, you continue to feed hot or you continue to feed cold. It is bad to change from one to the other. And also simply the feeding routine. You can imagine the calf that is fed at maybe 8 in the morning and 4 in the afternoon. At about 3:30, he will think to himself, only half an hour to go. And he will get up and he will have a look around and he will stretch and maybe he will look at the weather and he will think, only 3 minutes to go. And you can imagine the saliva running. And then he looks and it's 10 past 4. And he thinks, oh, que lástima. And still nothing has happened. And then at 4:30 or maybe 4:45, he thinks, caramba, because still nothing has happened. And then he thinks, today I am not going to be fed. And so he goes back down, and by 5:30 it's no good. So he sits back down, and maybe he will not have supper, but he will watch the television instead. But at 6:30, someone rushes up to him, puts the bucket in, and expects him to drink immediately. And as you can see, nothing happens. So the feeding routine is very important. We need to establish a routine so that calf will have pleasure in taking his milk. Next acetate, please. So, if we are going to make sure that feeding is carried out properly, what do we need to do? Well, many of these things we have already spoken about. Make sure we keep the same routine. The bucket for water must stay as the bucket for water, whereas the bucket containing concentrates is to be moved to give him milk, and then the concentrate bucket is put back in. Be careful with the temperature of the milk so that it is constant for that calf. Do be careful in terms of feeding the calf immediately after changes in management, particularly anything that causes stress. The calf that has traveled any distance and suddenly is put in a new accommodation, maybe it's been carried on a horse by a gaucho and then put into a pen, you need to allow that calf to settle for a while before it is ready to be fed. And certainly for the first feed, feed it only a small quantity. If it has just had its horns amputated and it has a terrible headache, then clearly it is not going to feel like feeding. In England we have the expression, not tonight because I have a headache. I'm sure you do not know what I am talking about. But the calf is the same. If his head is aching, it is not going to enjoy drinking milk. And also, if you are feeling a little sore, you will not want to drink milk, or you will not enjoy drinking milk. Next acetate, please. We have already talked about the position of the bucket. The flow rate of milk, again extremely important. If the flow of milk is too rapid, then milk will spill from the groove and will spill into the rumen, and you will get problems. Calves which will not drink, maybe because they are sick and then have to be force-fed, given milk by drenching, maybe in a bottle or with a pipe, it is best not to give them milk, but to give them an electrolyte solution. Because if they are forced fed, it cannot be a pleasurable sensation. I will not continue the example I have been using in the past, but I will simply leave it to your imagination. Calves which do not drink their milk properly are a problem. Because if they do not enjoy this process, and they just drink a little and stop, drink a little and stop, then it is certainly difficult for them to get closure of the groove. And maybe calves like this are best fed milk from a teat. Maybe a teat connected to the front of the bucket. I know when I was rearing calves myself a few years ago, I had a calf which would never drink milk from the bucket. As soon as I made it drink, it would develop problems in its rumen, and I had to take it through to weaning simply using a teat on the bucket. And I think we must be prepared to do things like this. After all, management is simply looking after the detail. Someone who is good at calf rearing will see the small things that need doing and will be prepared to make exceptions for the individual animal. Next acetate, please. If we have a calf which has problems in the rumen associated with poor esophageal groove closure, what are some of the things we can do for treatment? Firstly, if they are bloated, then clearly we need to release the gas. And I think the best thing to do is to pass a tube down into the stomach. If possible, I like to avoid pushing a needle into the rumen. Many of these calves are bloated, and the bloat occurs partly because the milk is fermenting and producing gas. So if we administer antibiotics by mouth, this stops the bacteria from fermenting the milk and helps the calf to recover. We will have to stop feeding them milk for a few days, but they still need fluid, and hence it's best to give them electrolyte solutions. I understand that commercial electrolyte solutions in Argentina are quite expensive to buy, but there is no reason why you should not mix up something simple for yourself. For example, just with some glucose and with some salt. The mixture I use is a dessert spoonful of glucose plus a teaspoonful of salt, a small teaspoonful of salt, in 1 pint of water. But as you do not have pints in Argentina, that is of no value to you. It's also important to remove solid food, because the rumen is not working properly, then we need to almost totally clean out the rumen and start its development again. So I would like to see the solid food removed. Put the calf back on milk, preferably via teat, so that it drinks well and it really enjoys the suckling process. And then hopefully, after another few weeks, it can be weaned. In some cases, however, they develop bloat again, and then the only answer is to construct a permanent fistula. Have the next slide, please. I have put in this slide to show that in England, where we use bedding, one of the problems is that as the bedding accumulates, the floor surface and therefore the calf goes up in the air, but of course the bucket stays at the same height, and this can certainly be a problem. This is a typical calf that has a ruminal problem, probably caused by failure of the esophageal groove. You can see that he is bloated, and also that he has a chronic diarrhea. With this calf we had tried medical treatment, but the condition recurred, so we simply constructed a ruminal fistula. It is a very simple and cheap operation where the wall of the rumen, which is just here, is stitched to the skin. The response to this treatment is quite dramatic, and the calf improves very quickly. Obviously, some food will spill from the side of the calf, but that's not important. The calf grows very well. It certainly grows much better than if you did not construct this fistula. And later in life, if you wish, the fistula can be closed, maybe when the calf is 6 or 12 months old. For those of you who are watching the slides very carefully, you will think that in England we have calves with peculiar anatomy because the rumen is on the right-hand side. It's no problem because the slide is in back to front. I just wanted to know if anyone was awake. As you can see, this calf is now 6 or 9 months old. The hole is still present, but he is growing fine. And then about a month later, I cut out the hole, seal it over, and there is no scar left. Next acetate, please. No, yeah, acetate. No, acetate. Ah, thanks, right. Probably the important management factors associated with feeding I've already discussed. And so I will go through these a little more quickly. In the written lecture notes, you will see I have described the process of digestion